Good afternoon, students. I welcome you all in my online class for the M.Ed Sem 4 on 9th May 2020, Saturday. At the very beginning, I would like to offer you a belated good wish on the occasion of Rabindra Jayanti on 8th May 2020. Now let's start our day with a discussion on vocationalization of secondary education. This comes under the unit that I have been dealing with under the course 2.4.3b. At present, just before the global outbreak of COVID-19, internationally a major and persistent overall trend in education has been the massification of both elementary schooling and secondary schooling. But we all know, currently the management of this COVID pandemic has overshadowed everything else. Now let's get back to our topic. Due to the universalization of elementary education, many more students are getting into secondary level education nowadays. In the past, it was widely accepted that secondary schooling and higher education are for a relatively small number and proportion of students who are mainly concerned with receiving an academic type education. And in the case of universities, they were getting education to get entry for higher status professions. But there is now more emphasis on economic productivity, with secondary schools and many universities increasingly stressing skills development for employability, and so preparing students more directly to meet the future labor force requirements of the 21st century. Now, if we discuss the historical development of this vocationalization of secondary education, we can start our discussion from the medieval and Renaissance period in Europe. Traditionally, vocational skills have been developed through apprenticeship structures. Secondary schools, as we know nowadays, in medieval and Renaissance Europe, focused on intellectual training in its narrow sense, educating only an elite group of men in the liberal arts. But Industrial Revolution put a new emphasis on science and technology, and as a result, a number of technical schools, which were obviously less prestigious than those elite schools, appeared in the 19th century. Gradually, the whole of secondary education became less elitist and its curriculum became more diverse. Three overlapping categories of curricula. Number one, general or academic curricula, traditional academic curriculum. Technical and vocational education and training related curriculum, which is our topic for today's discussion. And the third one is diversified or comprehensive curriculum, could be identified from that period itself. Now, academic and these vocational training related schools are single purpose institutions, but diversified schools lie in the middle of the continuum and are multipurpose, combining elements of both ends of the spectrum into their programs. They combine the objectives of an academic course of study with one or more vocational fields to make schools more responsive to labor market needs and to serve a more diverse student base. Typically, these schools allow academic students to take some vocational coursework and vocational students to continue some academic coursework, vice versa. In many cases, all types of schools include preparing students for the world of work among their objectives. Now, to determine the nature of secondary schooling, a number of priorities have to be considered by educational planners nowadays. For example, they have to plan to prepare an individual to fill wage sector jobs, to raise the quality of university entrants, to reinforce nation building, and simultaneously to increase enrollments of a particular group in a particular region. So that's a huge task. Therefore, to position secondary education within a country's educational system, many dimensions need to be taken into account, including the degree of vocationalization of the curriculum. Now, how to understand the degree of vocationalization of the curriculum? The share of curriculum devoted to vocational subjects reflects the degree of this vocationalization. Now, let's get back again to the history of this vocationalization of secondary education. The process of vocationalization of secondary education actually began in the 1970s with the aims of promoting the social inclusion of less privileged groups in education and training, narrowing educational gaps, and avoiding social fragmentation. That's we have just discussed a few minutes back. Now, vocational skills were viewed as a coherent part of the overall education system. The diversification of secondary education and the expansion of access to vocationalization have helped to retain more students in schools. These social function of vocationalization led someone to stay in schools longer than they might have if they only had the choice of an academic rigid curriculum. At that time, the vocationalization of secondary education referred to the process of including practical skills in the educational process. Hence, vocationalization was designed to prepare students for the world of work better than does just academic education. Traditionally, it was interpreted as not being oriented towards a specific class of occupations or trades, and it does not lead to a qualification that is relevant to the labor market. So, these were some of the very common negative remarks regarding the vocational education on those days. Now, the difference between the vocationalization of general education, mind it, vocationalization of general education and the vocational stream in secondary education refers to the degree of institutional integration of vocational training into education. Now, there have been 3 levels of secondary education in the world. First one is the general education programs, which are not designed explicitly to prepare participants for specific occupations or trades, or for entry to further vocational or technical education programs. Another one is pre-vocational or pre-technical education programs. These are mainly designed to introduce participants to the world of work and to prepare them for entry into further vocational or technical education programs. Successful completion of such programs does not lead to a vocational or technical qualification that is directly relevant to the labor market, though. The third and final type is the vocational or technical education programs, which prepare participants for direct entry into specific occupations without further training. Successful completion of these programs leads to a vocational or technical qualification that is relevant to the labor market. These vocational and pre-vocational programs are further divided into 2 categories. One is school-based and combined school-based and work-based programs. On the basis of the amount of training provided in schools as opposed to the workplace. Programs are classified as school-based if at least 75% of the program curriculum is presented in the school environment, a proportion of which may include distance education. So it is very straightforward. This classification is very straightforward. When 75% of a vocational program curriculum is presented in the school environment, it creates a school-based vocational education program. While, on the other hand, in combined school and work-based programs, less than 75% of the program curriculum is presented in the school environment or through distance education. So it is comparatively easier for us to understand the difference between school-based vocational program and work-based vocational program. At present, though, the human capital or human resource development debate generates a more functional approach to skills development that impacts general pre-vocational and vocational education and changes the nature of secondary education, vocational education. The demand to enhance productivity and the employability of individuals through the development of work-related competencies brings the vocational strand at the secondary school level under the umbrella of vocationalization together with general and pre-vocational options. The main reason for this is, in some contexts, vocational education development at the level of secondary education can have a maximum effect in increasing the employability of graduates. Functional aspects of this training relevant to labor market needs, such as technological knowledge, flexibility, and better productivity, become increasingly more important than educational achievements. Therefore, A mental shift from traditional vocational education approaches to context-related world of work competencies can be interpreted as a request to broaden the notion of vocationalization by including secondary vocational education under its umbrella. So the change is from education driven to a functional model of skills development within secondary schooling nowadays. Governments commonly establish high targets for the proportion of secondary students they want to enroll in vocational programs, as these governments see a strong correlation between the proportion of students enrolled in vocational subjects and per capita income. In this backdrop, as per the report of the World Bank in 2006, India targeted 1/4 of all secondary students to be enrolled in the vocational or technical secondary streams. However, there have been implementational challenges for the government of India. So, another move is from specific job skills training to flexible training. The slow change of available technologies in the 1960s and 70s favored specialized skills development and more or less guaranteed a career for life. The more rapid space of technological changes in recent years, however, particularly in developed countries, has contributed to the increasing importance of general education that helps workers to perform within the high productivity sectors. Therefore, vocationalization of general education became more and more important for these economies, and the role of general human capital is increasing day by day. These distinction between general and specific training and knowledge closely relates to technologies and could be described in terms of general human capital, abbreviated as GHC, G for Gujarat, H for Haryana, and C for Calcutta, and specific human capital, that is SHC, S for Srinagar, H for Haryana, and C for Calcutta. The distinction is made on the basis of whether the individuals can operate only one specific technology. If it is the case, then that individual is an SHC or specific human capital. On the other hand, GHC or general human capital can operate any technology. Now, depending on the stage of development, countries should balance the development of GHC and SHC properly to ensure the adaptation and diffusion of new technologies. Now, there is a twist in this tale also, like in all other stories of human development. A large body of empirical literature has developed over the years, which argues strongly on cost-benefit grounds against vocationalization of secondary education. They express that Vocationalization of secondary education is generally more expensive than general education because of factors such as smaller classes and the cost of equipment and supplies. As for example, they opined that the unit cost of vocational education in India is about 60% higher than those of general secondary education. This can be found in the 2010 report of Government of India. Despite these higher costs, graduates from vocational education mostly do not receive higher wages than their peers from general education background. Now, considering costs and the difficulty of implementation, vocationalization may be considered advantageous only in specific cases, as pointed. Training in the use of computers. This training of computer is applicable across a variety of occupations and across subjects within general education. As for example, right now, with our knowledge in computer applications, very limited knowledge of computer applications, ICT, etc., we are able to hold online classes. Now, low-cost programs that are not gender-specific, such as agriculture, accounting, and business studies, can be done under vocationalization of secondary education because these are useful for broad occupational segments. Thirdly, entrepreneurship training to enable secondary level students to plan, start, or run a business to boost self-employment may be handy. Now, what are the implementation initiatives? Traditionally, countries around the globe have placed varying emphasis on general and vocational education within secondary schooling. These have been dependent on various historical, social, technological, economic, and political considerations, obviously. But this vocationalization of secondary education is taking a new form now, and it aims at increasing students' employability through developing their personal characteristics, general competencies, and specific vocational skills. The emphasis on the particular components depends mainly on the level of economic development, which predetermines the required skills. Now again, vocationalization occurs at both lower and upper secondary levels through both embedded and distinct deliveries. We all know from our experiences, our own experiences from our school days. At the upper secondary level, most countries have both technical or vocational schools and diversified secondary schools with general academic and vocational courses. According to the 2010 report of Government of India, India has been making a distinction between work-centered education, which is known as vocationalized education, and vocational education at the upper secondary level. So there is a distinction between vocationalized education or work-centered education and vocational education. Currently, there are no relationships between these two components. Work-centered education is included in the primary standards, elementary classes, classes 1 to 8, to elementary classes and upper primary classes, classes 1 to 8, to make the students aware of the concept of work. What is work? What does it mean to work? These concepts students get normally in the elementary and upper primary classes. At the lower secondary level or secondary level, classes 9 and 10, pre-vocational education does exist and aims to increase students' familiarity with the world of work. But vocational education as a distinct stream exists in upper secondary or higher secondary classes only, that is classes 11 and 12. It was introduced in the year 1976-77 in India and then revisited in 1992-93 as a way to diversify educational opportunities, enhance individual employability, and reduce the mismatch between supply and demand of a skilled labor force. Actually, it was also aimed at diverting a substantial portion of students away from the academic streams in higher education. Most of the courses in vocational education are school-based. However, some of these have been perceived on a collaborative model with the industry. The theory part and some basic skills are developed in schools, and further refinement of skills are done in industries. India is among the countries at present with the lowest proportion of trained youth. 80% of new entrants to the workforce in any calendar year have had no opportunity for skill training. But the existing training capacity is very less compared to the proportion of new entrants to the workforce annually. As I have just told, 80% of new entrants to the workforce in any calendar year have had no skill training. This is a very serious affair which needs immediate attention of the government. So, the government has taken due recognition of the skill gaps and already planned to take new initiatives for bridging them. To seal those gaps. In this regard, the National Policy on Skill Development, Government of India, provides a direction for skill development in the country. This has been initiated in the year 2009. Now, let us discuss some of the problems in vocationalization of secondary education system in India. The present vocational education system in India is facing some serious problems, including outdated courses and curricula, low funding, and multiple levels of policy planning and governing. Now, let us discuss some of these major problems of the Indian vocational education system at the secondary level. First, let us discuss about the problem of multiplicity of regulations, certifications, and curricula. Curriculum is the main pillar of vocational education system. As vocational education provisions are implemented by different departments, ministries, agencies, and organizations, whether government or private, with a multiplicity of certifications, standards, and curricula, they result in overlapping of courses and institutions, as well as creating confusion for students and employers. Next, we can discuss the demand-supply mismatch of job market. The current existing vocational education programs at the secondary level are largely supply driven and still lack relevant training for available jobs. There is a need to improve links between vocational education imparting institutions and the industry to minimize this mismatch. A divergence between the skills that the population possesses and the skills required by industry is a major cause of low employability among Indian youth. As already told, there is an urgent need to decrease these gaps between industry need and manpower supply in India if we wish to look into a brighter future of tomorrow. Now the third point is poor perception and public mindset about vocational education. In countries like India, vocational education has always been considered by the public in general and parents as a career choice for the less academically qualified, with the impression that this vocational education is for the school dropouts rather than as an important strategy to train skilled workers. Too much attention and resources are given to academics rather than vocational education, normally by the parents and common public of India. Many Indian parents want their children to pursue a clerical job or be an office assistant. We call sarkari naukar, khash sarkari naukar, a government job like that, or even a job in private organizations, not realizing that a technician, properly trained and skilled technician, can earn more than these jobs. Fourth point can be lack of coordination among government agencies and regulatory bodies. Different ministries manage their employability initiatives independently in India. And there is a wide range of vocational education providers such as social businesses, non-profit organizations and corporates. Coordinations among all these players is required to create an enabling environment that enhances the capacity, quality and utilization of vocational education at the secondary level in India. Next point can be lack of updated curriculum for vocational education. An updated curriculum which is relevant to present day need of the industry is a major requirement to solve the problems of vocational education. The curriculum there should be relevant to the need of the industries in 21st century. Shortage of qualified teachers is also very important. Availability of good quality trained and qualified teachers and trainers is important for successful implementation of vocational education. Now, poor recruitment processes of governments or other organizations is responsible for this shortage of qualified teachers, who in turn are given the responsibility to train the youth of India in different vocations. Lack of proper infrastructure like building, modern equipments and raw materials is a hurdle in learning during training in vocational education. This can be attributed to improper release of funds by the concerned authorities. Therefore, it is clear from the above points that there are a lot of challenges in the field of vocational education in secondary, vocationalization of secondary education in India, and to achieve the global targets in the 21st century. Therefore, there is a strong need of substantial expansion of quality technical and vocational education and training system in our country. Now, suppose there is a question that what are the solutions for the problems of vocationalization of secondary education in India? Well, as I have always told you, that when you are able to identify problems, you can have ideas to solve them. Likewise, as we have just discussed the problems of vocationalization of secondary education in India, I believe that you can elaborate yourself on the solutions to the problems of these vocationalization in secondary education in our country.